biggest fight of 2016 in my mind, and it's 6 days away.
Huge fight. I'm still not exactly sure who the hell I'm going to pick here. Just fascinated with this fight. Both these guys, just tremendous on the feet. Nate Diaz obviously having a big advantage on the ground. We'll break this down later, right?
Well, no, I think we'll get to it now because Danny Rub's coming up here in 5 minutes. So I guess I'll start with you on Conor McGregor. We seem to know, or at least we think we know, what is going to be different, right? We've seen some of the sparring footage and what it's been focusing on. We've heard what John Kavanagh has said on this show a week ago and in other forums as well about routine. And we've heard Conor now talk about what his routine has been. One of my big questions was, why was there such a lack of routine prior?
Right.
Because as I ingested what Kavanagh said on our show and then more media leading up to this show today, I kept thinking, it's absolutely great that they seem to think they know what they need to do to win this rematch or put themselves in a better position to do so. But it seemed to me like they were just getting by on hard work for a while.
Yeah, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. When you have a fighter like Nate Diaz, you got to respect him. And by that, I mean, you got to prepare properly for him. You got to look at what he brings to the table. And you can't just go out there and say, well, whoever it is, we're going to be ready. I don't train for my opponent. It's about me and what I need to do. They need to fight me. I don't need to fight them, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Now, you can do that at a lower level. You can do that, in the early part of your career. But as you get to the elite levels, you got to know what your fighter's going to bring. You got to prepare your fighter in a very specific way. So, listen, in some ways, I think it's very interesting knowing that Conor didn't have that kind of preparation for Diaz, and now he will, and he's going to, prepare for all the things that. But more than anything else, I think he went in there and he pressures fighters and he overwhelms them with his slickness, his ability to counter, his ability to slip his head off the center line and kind of strike back and move you backwards repeatedly. And guys just don't have the finesse to counter him and to strike back. And a lot of guys don't have the mental fortitude to withstand those barrage of punches, to take the power of Conor McGregor. Nate Diaz can. And I think Conor McGregor just kept expecting him to just crumble. And Nate Diaz obviously does not crumble. He's going to stay in your face. He's going to stay confident. He's always going to believe that he can win the fight, that he can rally back. I mean, the Diaz brothers are as tough as they come, and I don't think he had that same respect. Now, preparation-wise, he still was ready. He still was the sharper guy overall. He got caught with the 1-2 twice. I think you were saying that Patrick Wyman was saying something that Conor McGregor had no idea how to deal with the jab. He didn't get hit with the jab the whole first round. He didn't get hit with a jab until the middle part of the second round. So I don't know exactly what he's talking about, but I think that Conor got a little lazy. I don't want to say a little lazy. He got a lot of lazy. Got tired, was not moving his head. His hands were really far down, and he got hit with the 1-2. Yeah, and he got hit with it again. Those were the two shots. That was the only thing. Nate Diaz capitalized on it and obviously blew him away on the mat.
Certainly McGregor had success early on in that fight. I thought it was interesting when you asked John Kavanagh last week about this new approach and routine, and you asked him whether or not it was going to be adopted long term. And I thought it was a good question, and it elicited a pause from him because I don't think he necessarily wanted to commit to just how maybe strenuous and serious this training camp has been, given, to your point, the success that they have had in the past. When you look at the body of work for Conor McGregor, beat the greatest featherweight of all time in 13 seconds, and at that point in time was 19-2 and undefeated in the UFC, and had this bump in the road against Nate Diaz. I felt like Conor, leading up to this fight, you've also seen a human side of him, which you always get to see, and that's why his fan base is absolutely enormous, I think, is because you really know where he stands. But it did grate on him, everything that had to do with the short notice nature of that fight and the opponent switch. And now knowing how to handle it, I think a lot of people expect not just a different pre-fight approach, but during fight week in terms of his emotions and better being able to check them and conserve energy and everything that goes into the weight cut and certain things that he'll be doing. But as far as fight night is concerned, Kenny, I mean, don't you think he almost has to fight more of a 25-minute style, or at least a style that will afford him some success if we do get to rounds 4 or 5?
I believe so, yes. He's got to be in shape for 25 minutes. now the question becomes, okay, great. You're in shape for 25 minutes. Do you have the discipline? Do you have the discipline to not try to look for that knockout and not to get too excited? And the thing is Conor's going out there and saying that if he can make a prediction, he says, and I will, I see myself knocking out Nate Diaz in the second round. So it's like, I don't know. I mean, maybe that happens. Maybe it's not an easy thing to knock out a Diaz brother. That is for sure. So if he lands shots, and I think he will get the better of Nate, especially early on, will he do the same thing? Will he have the discipline to stay calm and not just continuously pressure Nate Diaz and get himself tired?
After the first fight, which was UFC 196, March 5th of this year, a lot of us talk about just underrating Nate Diaz overall as an elite mixed martial artist. And certainly we know what his Gracie Jiu-Jitsu credentials are and what he is said to have done in training sessions against world-class competition. We know what he has done in the UFC. We know what he can do with his hands. What do you think it was about Nate Diaz? Is it just getting a win of this magnitude on this type of stage? I mean, I think the Michael Johnson fight was a big spot and certainly opened up a lot of eyes, I think, and obviously his post-fight speech added to that fight, taking on an even greater life. But what is it specifically about Nate Diaz that maybe hasn't gotten the credit that he's now getting?
I think that he's been inconsistent throughout his career, right? And I think the time off before the Michael Johnson fight really helped him. For me, I know for me as a martial artist and looking at all the things that I did right and wrong and, fixing all the dumb mistakes that I made throughout my career, I think helped me technically as a fighter or as a martial artist, I should say. I'm not fighting anymore. But for Nate Diaz, having that break away, I think he got a chance to look at what he was doing, how he was preparing for fights, and what he needs to do even more to kind of get those bigger fights. And I think he realizes the importance of what he has, the opportunity that he has, and beating a guy like Michael Johnson, he knew exactly what he wanted to do. He was going to call out Conor McGregor, and the fight ended up coming to fruition. Even though the fight was made between Conor and RDA, it seemed like he just knew something was going to happen. He knew he was going to fight Conor at some point. His destiny has been fulfilled, and I think that the way that he matches up with Conor, to be honest, John, is it's a good matchup for him. He's got a 76-inch reach, and Conor likes to strike with his opponents. Nate Diaz is an excellent boxer. He's a guy who's boxed with high-level guys, supposedly boxing with guys like Andre Ward and, all the pros that he works with. I mean, he's not going to be intimidated by anyone. And the fact that he's got this ground advantage over Conor McGregor just is going to make him a tough guy to beat. And I think Nate Diaz just coming into his own as a fighter and getting the right matchups is why he's kind of this new star. And for anyone who goes out there and beats someone like a Conor McGregor, or we saw it with Holly Holm, she quickly, rose to stardom after beating Ronda Rousey. You got to beat those superstars. If you do that, you're going to elevate your name. There's no other way around it.
Amazing that Nate has pulled alongside his brother Nick. Some would suggest that maybe Nate Diaz is now a bigger name in mixed martial arts. I think the Nick supporters would get pretty loud at that point, but amazing. If you see where Nate Diaz was a few years ago, you would never think that he would get to Nick's level in terms of the magnitude of the fights or the paychecks. And I can't speak to the exact terms of the paychecks, but, Nate Diaz is about to realize a big one.
Yeah, and he's been fighting forever. I mean, you think about, the consistency and the guys that he's fought throughout his career. He's been able to build that fan base for several years now in the UFC, and it's great to see it, man. He deserves the big paydays. He's been working his ass off for a very long time, and awesome to see in the position he's in.
And I believe Nate Diaz has only been finished once in the UFC, I think, by Josh Thompson. And most people who picked Conor McGregor the first time around were picking him to finish the fight. So later on, where I'm going to ask Kenny, and it's hard to sort of get into this without giving a prediction, but, do you think Conor McGregor can win a 25-minute fight and decision Nate Diaz on Saturday night? But now